Hey everyone, Nyx here, and welcome back to Housecraft. In the previous episode, we rebuilt our Death Knight's fortress to make it a proper barracks. With that, let's venture downstairs into the sort of basement section of our undead tavern, go through this secret door into this now empty room for what will finally be this character's laboratory. As you can see, I've already laid out the room some, and I've discovered something pretty helpful. One of the reasons that I've liked using empty stairway rooms is they get this really high vaulted ceiling. But it turns out if you set your ceiling style to generic, rather than something like folk medium, you actually get that fully raised ceiling. And the first thing I'm going to do is something I actually previewed a little in the previous episode, and that is going to be this hanging, partially constructed Legion mech, because Siobhan is a huge fan of the Burning Legion and its war machines, and I think she would absolutely have one that she's working on fixing up hanging about. It's going to be a bit of a kit bashed build, and I'm very excited to see what I can do with it. So the pieces I was using for this were already pretty solid. I had this war map and then also the dread scar map to serve as a sort of leg, but this had some odd angles so that it actually looks like it's hanging. The design that this is based on is the mount that you can get from Hellfire Citadel Mythic. This torch works really nicely for an arm, I think. But like a more long arm that you'd use for actually interacting with objects rather than an arm that's like what we'll have on the other side, which would be more like a cannon sort of thing. And then I was using a chest, sort of like a crutch chassis thing. That looks so good. It looks like it's actually aiming out to shoot at us. It's perfect. Using this map as like the centerpiece works wonders because it gives it eyes, which really helps personify it in this sort of robotic sense. Then I'm going to put a bunch of random junk around its base. I want a way to actually walk up to it to make it look like she's actually working on it and it's not just sitting here. So using the same shelf trick that we used outside in our undead area to make a ladder of sorts. Oh my gosh, this is perfect. I'm so happy right now. I've been thinking about this build for so long and it's already starting to come together so much nicer than I could have imagined. Oh my goodness, yes. Is it possible to parkour up into it? Oh, maybe I should absolutely. What am I saying? Maybe I should have put a chair in there. Absolutely, there should be a chair in here so she can actually sit in it. Fortunately, she doesn't sit in it at an angle, but this is amazing. One of those builds that when you finish it, you just gotta jump around it for a little bit because holy shit, it turned out perfectly. I think it's looking amazing. So we're going to start off and actually go and grab some of the hidden artifact appearances that I've been missing in order to get a couple things from the Demon Hunter and Warlock order halls before we move on to grabbing stuff from Mechagon and then finally doing our professions. As we get into building here, I want to talk about Siobhan and her history. As a child, she was fairly lonely because she grew up without a father. He had left before she was born, and her mother passed away of illness shortly after. Okay, so I grabbed those hidden appearances. It was actually pretty easy, and now I've come to Mechagon because this is where you can get a ton of cool mechanical decor that I might want to use, and I've been meaning to collect it for experience anyway. Shiv's best company were her books, left to her by her grandfather. In them, she researched all sorts of different herbs, alchemy, and the like, became quite the accomplished alchemist, eventually ending up as a member of Lordaeron's Alchemy Society. There she researched and grew her skills, and while her contemporaries were concerned with stuff like immortality and turning lead to gold, she was more concerned with the making of the universe. It actually did end up going faster than expected, but only because back in BFA I had an Alliance side old I played really heavily and got too exalted with Mechagon, did a bunch of content with them, and so she actually had a ton of resources left over that at some point I must have sold or just gotten rid of to make bank space on my main. So I was able to just buy at least one of everything and a couple extras. Hopefully I don't need too much more, but we're making good progress on all the grinding. Now I just need to go grab some vendor decor that I have in mind, and then we have to get into crafting, which is going to be interesting. And it was this larger interest that led her into acquiring a skull from an adventurer that belonged to a demon, a skull which began talking to her and sharing all sorts of knowledge about the Burning Legion, its infinite armies. While this should have frightened Siobhan, it instead excited her. But before the Kirin Tor could crack down on her, the Third War happened and she was raised into undeath. Now she could fully throw herself into demonic research, summoning demons and becoming a more powerful warlock, while lending her aid to the Royal Apothecary Society under Putris. But I have gathered a ton of decor. You can see some of the crafted items actually sitting in my bags. I like to do it this way so that if I don't end up needing all of the items that I crafted, I can always sell the excess on the auction house. But before I start putting all of this day's work to actual use, I'm going to take a look at some of my inspiration spots and also talk about some of my general inspiration outside of the game to get a refresher, get the ideas percolating in my mind as we get into the building phase. Firstly, having a look at the Warlock Order Hall. This is something that I'd already seen, but this sort of voidy summoning circle, this is what we needed the hollow dices and a few of the other items for. Now that right there is a piece of decor I wish I could have, a big bound up Pit Lord. In this training area, I really like the powered up cages, but this area, and that actually reminds me, I need to grab these sheer curtains, is definitely something I want to have in mind for like the bedroom area of the build. This gateway is something as well that I'm heavily considering trying to recreate in some way. Sort of, I'm torn between if I want my demon summoning area to take after these things or if I want it to be more like a Legion Fell Gate, because either are ones that she would definitely have in her lair. That was just a start, and there's another area I'm turning to for inspiration, and that is these sort of old school undead zones and the labs in there. I was actually looking at this one the other day. The shelving in particular is something that's really inspiring. Though these bottles about. But on the topic of laboratories, it actually makes me think of some other references I have in mind. And obviously I've mentioned Arcane a few times before in these videos as being an inspiration for this build overall. And one of the places that I'm taking inspiration from is, of course, Singe's laboratory, with the way it has these big bottles around. It's all sort of lit by his experiments. Similarly style of the tables, lots of pipes around. Something I really want to do with this build is link everything with pipes and make it feel like a living, breathing structure that is as much a construction as Siobhan herself is. I'm also a big fan of the show She-Ra, and particularly Entrapta is an inspiration for Siobhan from that show. And I love the whole sequence of episodes and moments that she has with Hordak in his laboratory. Again, it's similar where it has these big vitrines around, vials of fluid with experiments and stuff, lots of scrap metal, all different in progress experiments and technology. And all of this, even though it's more old school, it still has a lot of charm and a lot of things that fit the sort of aesthetic and energy I'm trying to provide really nicely. Just a shame we can't get whatever this thing is as a piece of decor. With all that inspiration fresh in the mind, it is time to get building here. The next thing I'm going to do is make her workstation right next to it over here. When Putris ultimately sided with the Legion and decided to attempt to overthrow Sylvanas, Siobhan sided with him, and in the aftermath of that, she ended up losing her arm when she had to use a blight bomb to escape the Alliance and Horde forces in Undercity. For years, she lived as a fugitive while her body rotted from the side effects of that blight bomb. But she was not going to give up on herself. She sought out a means to save her body, and with the help of that skull she had acquired so long ago, she learned of the homunculi that the Legion employed, and in learning this she sought to create one. She set her body within it and bound her soul to its core, awakening to find a new form that was quite odd, but one that was quite welcome. When the Legion invaded once more, Siobhan actually was brought into their ranks. They sought her out with her connections to demonic magic until the Black Harvest was able to capture her and eventually convert her back to the side of Azeroth. In the aftermath of her time with the Black Harvest, she found her way back into War Chief Sylvanas' ranks, Of course, that too didn't work out so great, as she became a fugitive once more for a time until the Desolate Council was formed and clemency was granted by Apothecary Farinel for folks who had been loyal to Sylvanas to return. Where in the build am I right now? That's right, I'm in the pipes. So I may have let this very simple workstation get away from me a little bit, but this build has just been flowing so well. What I did here was use the Arathi bar shelving with a Acarus work table in front to get this nice cluttered look and make it into a proper desk, hide some of these apothecary cabinets in back to further enhance that undead and again, apothecary look of course. And then I've been using these plague canisters from Wrath in a few spots. Something I'm really happy with is that I put these chess pieces from the Diablo pre-order floating in them, because when you see these around in game, they're not usually empty, they usually have stuff floating, and what's a good scientific vitrine without some odd, creepy objects floating inside? Of course, any good apothecary needs ingredients, so I've got this Stormwind trellis with some nice greenery and plants placed on it to add to that, and also these spices and powders about. Easy cauldron for brewing. And as I said, I was in the pipes, so I've got pipes running all around the build like I wanted, and I think it does a ton to enhance this sort of mad scientist aesthetic. I've used the Blightfire candles to give an effect that they're sort of leaking and dripping down, and then dyed cobblestones on the floor to make puddles of whatever they're leaking. You know, I might not be able to get a big fleshy tentacle thing to spit out green sludge, but a pipe will do. And then it's all coming out of this big fell pool that I imagine she went through a ritual to sort of bubble up, kind of like how the Hand of Gul'dan was formed. And we've used this mechagon, I think it's called a recalibration or recycling machine, to give the sense of a pump. And if you listen to the audio here, it actually makes clicking and whirring noises to add ambience that further just ties this whole build together. So far I am loving it, as you can probably tell by how much I built since I last checked in. We still have a couple things left. I'd like to get a bedroom in for Shiv, although maybe I just leave it at the lab and be happy with that. And I also need areas for her to summon the demons, imprison them, all that good stuff. I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to lay it out, so I'm just going to start placing things, see what happens. Though she has remained largely independent and by herself, focusing on her own research and her own utilization of demonic technology and magic. With the void arising come midnight, it's likely that she'll delve into researching the Void Storm in particular, this new realm of roiling darkness that would greatly fascinate her. The portal is in now, and I fiddled with a few different designs. I went for that traditional ritual circle with this sort of pillars that we saw in the Warlock Order Hall, but ultimately I did decide on that more Legion-inspired big green portal with a frame like this. And then we've got this Legion communicator. I figured that she's tapping into Legion communication lines, contacting demons, summoning them through the portal before imprisoning them. Of course, we've got cages around for just that purpose, some more sort of fell-ish blood and, you know, drips from the pipes up above. And something that I think is really cool and really adds to this effect is that this altar, from getting a hidden warlock appearance, is actually interactable, and when you interact with it, this thing rises from it. The idea that it's meant to be a portal to a Legion world, it's almost like something is emerging out of it when we interact with it, and I think it looks so great and adds so much to the build. I also added a couple of mechanical objects near our Legion war machine, just things that add a bit more motion to the build and a bit more idea of this mechanical robotic work in progress area. They also have ambience, which further enhances the sensation of this lab. There is one thing left, as I'm sure you've noticed this door. A currently very sparse bedroom that I have about 21 budget left to finish. So it won't be anything too fancy, but it makes sense for Shiv not to have anything too fancy. She's very obsessed with her work and her science, so this is where the focus should be. But there is actually some nice decor that I want to farm, which I think will really help enhance this area. And we're going to try and make it look as pretty as we can in that final budget. And then we'll be able to call this whole space done. So I forgot to record like half this build, but we are done here with our little bedroom inspired by that succubus area of the Warlock Order Hall. And I do really like how it came out, especially these drapes. The Grand Drape of the Exiles, I think, is one of the most underrated decor items right now. Has this sheer pattern, you can walk right through it, beautiful purple color. And then, of course, we've got, classic Warlock succubus stuff, torment implements around, and just various relics, and of course probably Shiv's actual bed here, this coffin in that classic undead style. And while I really like this place and the fact that I was able to capture some of the energy from the Order Hall, it just feels a bit sparse, and that's because I'm pretty much maxed out on my budget. I could only get a couple more props in if I wanted to. And to even get to this point, I had to remove some elements elsewhere in the build. But I don't think I'm ultimately going to keep this, and the reason for that is because it just doesn't entirely fit Shiv. She's not the sort of person who would sleep or have something like this room, because she's so focused on her craft and her alchemy and engineering, all that sort of stuff, that she would basically not sleep. She barely slept even when she was alive. And I'd much rather put any budget that would go into trying to make a room like this work in a limited remaining budget into this space instead. So I'm going to get rid of that room, put a final few finishing touches on this area, and then I'll get back to you when the build is finally done. Though at the end of the day, Siobhan is not some scheming megalomaniac. She actually is primarily motivated by the acquisition of knowledge and research. It is her life, and she finds herself aligned with people who are typically on the more bad side, not because she wishes to do bad purely, but because they often have the morals and the resources that allow her to do the sort of research that other places would want her to slow down with. She has a great deal of difficulty understanding people, and in that way tends to prefer the company of her own demons. She just doesn't entirely get the whole friend thing. But she's extremely smart and she's quite fun, and I can't wait to get to roleplay more with her in the future. This lab that I've designed for her has perfectly captured her mad scientist personality, and I think it's going to be awesome to get to use it for just that. And with that, we are done at our full 2050 out of 2050 budget. For now, at least, at the time of the recording this, the pre-patch is tomorrow, and that will bring more housing levels and more budget to make more rooms in this house, but I am super happy with what we were able to finish off with the loss of our budget. Didn't change much layout-wise, but did throw some more details around. We got this banner in, cage, and a cauldron hanging from the ceiling like we saw in those undead zones. Nice banner of the Black Harvest here. And then this area I shifted some things around. I ended up using this saw that I crafted to make a sort of mechanical workbench. So now we've got both an alchemy area and an area for her engineering side. This crane moves in a really fun way where it looks like it's picking up the junk over here and then putting it on the workbench for use. As you can just see there, perfect timing. And then I also used the opportunity to put a fair few little details around. We've changed the book layout here, through another one in this corner, through one into the back here to cover up what was essentially empty space. Put some crates and barrels all around. Another book here, of course, more trash, and this cool motion crate as well. I also added these Draenei hollow dioces in front of the alchemy area to serve as sort of alchemy circles for rituals and transmutation of objects. But all in all, I think that this build has turned out amazingly. When I initially had the concept for it, I wasn't sure just how much I'd really be able to make it feel like a proper mad alchemist's mechanical laboratory, but all in all, I'm extremely happy with this build. It's a perfect fit for Siobhan and her story, which I hope you enjoyed learning about. With this build complete, though, we are officially done with our house, at least until the release of pre-patch, which does come out tomorrow, and will add more housing levels, more budget. We have a horde section in the future, and so we're far from done. And when this video goes live, I'm actually going to be streaming over on Twitch TV/nyxiemania for all that new housing goodness, leveling it up, maybe doing some work as well, just generally checking out the pre-patch. I hope to see you there. But for now, I've been Nyx, and I'll see you in the next one.